Yeah, of course.
Good afternoon. I would like to thank Professor Vito Cappellini who invited me to this conference. My name is Sara Becco. I'm with Fabrizio Ruppini, Dr. Fabrizio Ruppini. I am restorer and creator of this multi-computer. Very well, what is art? The answer to this question is not all trivial. Art represents the most effective tool used to communicate, and for this reason, the recovery of the knowledge handed down through figurative art represents a precious treasure and the instrument elected for the codification of the language interpreted in it. Art can be compared to a discourse, and its correct interpretation is subordinated to the reconstruction of a set of grammatically correct propositions. The effective comprehension of the cultural heritage concretizes in the definition of a multiplicity of components, each of which originates from the context in which the good is molded and by the artist's life which has forged its expression. The complexities largely originate from the fact that the passage of time inevitably has often led to the fragmentation of the original integrity of such discourses, exposing them to that disorder which, not infrequently, represents the cause and the first obstacle that precludes its correct, authentic, and proven interpretation. For these reasons, it is necessary to face and manage the complexity, that is, that set of non-univocal obstacles that stand between the recovery of the truth and the pitfalls of all that is false. This happens through a deep analysis of the basic information. From where do they come from? They sorting within the axioms and within the rules that will allow them to assume the properties that will generate the enunciatively functions. The discursive formation originated from the sorting of and the organization of an alphabet, namely enunciates, and the rules that are able to structure a sentence and a proposition intended as grammatically correct, until the aspired product is obtained, that is recovery of the information and enhancement of the assets and reliable, proven and validated. After having traced information, the method processes such information through several stages, which are all characterized by a process of inductive, deductive, and empirical logic. Each stage is responsible to put in place all the information in an hermeneutic order, different for status and nature, and to then define the process of formation until they generate the enunciates. The enunciates assume a strategic value because they are information able to communicate among themselves and establish mutual relations and correlations, and therefore they are able to generate the aspired product, that is, making the contradictions emerge and manage them in order to become enunciates. Managing complexities means to be able to examine, in a global context, the scenario from which the single fact that we are going to observe originates. Being able to really comprehend is fundamental to overcome every reductionist criterion, since it is essential to aim for a truth that shapes itself on the recovery and any interaction happen at time and in the time around the object of our interest or the event that we are examining. The context in which this masterpiece has been created coincides with an era heralded of radical philosophical change and a profound alteration in the expression of the historical, iconographic, and iconological meanings in the world of art. The artistic expression that characterized the Renaissance was forged contextually and consequently with the affirmation of an effect of an event that would have changed the history of philosophy, the Latin translations of Plato's text by the philosopher, humanist, and astrologer Marsilio Ficino. This innovative reinterpretation of Plato's text saved the passage between Platonism and Neoplatonism. A fundamental crux of this transition was the fact that Platonism, in the medieval interpretation of the text of Plato, affirmed the existence of a higher truth, that the sensible world that takes origin from the ideas, the eternal ideas forms, immutable and incorruptible, like we perceive them. They are subject to becoming, corruption, and death. Neoplatonism, even though it takes origin from Platonic philosophy, thanks to some connotations highlighted in the translations of Ficino, put in evidence the metaphysical aspects, namely the research of authentic and fundamental aspects of reality and religious aspects. The perception of the truth, therefore, passes through the empirical enlightenment. God, returned man, reveals to humanity the divine source. As previously theorized during the humanism of the first half of this century, the man was seen as scopula mundi, namely that harmonic interaction between soul and body, in which each is master of its own destiny. In this way, Neoplatonism took root in a social context in which the man, driven by a deep internal crisis, felt intensely the lapsing of sensible reality. In these transitions, a crucial step in the history of humanities was accomplished, which reconciled its highest expression in the artistic representation of the Renaissance. The absolute classic beauty owes itself to the Christian theological message that rejoins to the perfect beauty that finds the highest expression in God and in transcendence. According to the Neoplatonists, the world was organized in concentric spheres, whose extremes were the hyperuranium, understood as divine world, and matter, intended as the animal world. The man and all will reason may choose whether the rise to the divine world or descend towards the animal one, or even maintain an equidistant balance. This choice is accomplished through the meditation of love and beauty. In the Neoplatonic man, the seed of deep and intense love for Christ germinates, a harbinger of the courage and determination necessary to face the snares of sin and to illuminate with wisdom the tortuous path that leads toward eternal salvation. This deep feeling to hope of faith, explicating itself to the awareness of being able to overcome the snares and temptation of sin, kindles the hope of being able to aim to elevate the soul to the divine perfection. It is from this conviction that arises the need to express the concept of God and transcendence with the research of the perfect being, the meeting point between reason and faith, then is expressed through the will. To see this new ideal form and thus to contribute to its affirmation, it is the attitude of Thomas Aquinas, who assumes a key role when he establishes the compatibility of metaphysics and theology. In the representation of the frontal portrait, Dürer faces these themes with extraordinary ease and expresses his convincement, processing the representation of the self-portrayal from a frontal point of view. The soul of the Neoplatonic man, who aspired to reach the divine perfection, expresses his own determination to rise to the deepest Christian impulse through the representation of his effigy reinterpreted as the true icon of Christ. He wove in the silence of the traits that depict his own face, through the authoritative posture from which the vigorous dignity of the Neoplatonic man reveals, in the intense and deep gaze that the seafaring meets the one of the observer, with a natural gesture he brings his right hand to his heart, as if to seal his promise of faith. The effigy, which capturing itself all the more complex and profound passages that characterize this particular historical period, transmits an impetus of deep innovation, and in the silence of the image, apparently resolute, that depicts in great detail the feature of his own face, the artist delegates the most profound, extraordinary, and superb artistic expression, the task of witnessing the involving feeling of Christianity that pervades the soul of Albert Dürer. The frontal portrait of Dürer is not only an iconographic parallelism that aspires to overlap the divine figure, but expresses the desire of man to overcome the obstacles that stand between the weakness of the flesh and the will to rise to perfection of God. At last, it will not seem reckless to suppose that, within the sprout of such a radical philosophical religious maturation, and thanks to the determinate position taken by Thomas Aquinas, the stylistic connotations that conduce Dürer to plan the fourth portrait overlapped with the historical and religious relief of the figure of Christ in the Holy Shroud. The Holy Shroud, where the image appeared frontal, could testify meaningful relationships and connection referable to a tight interdependence with the complex iconography that permeates the elaboration and planning of the self-portrait of Monaco. Exactly in those years, furthermore, the shroud was located in Chambéry, and in 1502, the Savoia family built a chapel used for its conservation. In 1506, they obtained permission from Pope Julius II for public worship with Mass and a proper office. This event switched on spotting on the importance to the Holy Relic, precisely in the moment in which the transition of social, cultural, religious, and philosophical ideas was taking place, and which resulted in Neoplatonism and reached the maximum interpretation in the artistic expression of European Renaissance. Figurative art expresses this deepest concept through the aesthetic balance of the forms. It is in the light of this awareness that the ability to descend into the context of the origin assumes a fundamental role in which the material of the artwork, through centuries of history, meets the discovery of the truth embedded in its own reason to exist. We will be so daring to understand as much as we will be able to formulate the most reliable hypothesis to the question: what did this work of art arouse in the soul of he who observed the composition so avant-garde in the transition to scandalize? Now, the answer must be sought in the light of the fact that only to the most skilled and acquainted artists could have been appointed the task of combining effectively the profound expressions and the anxieties of the human soul through the neologism of the paradox of Kafka. The most authoritative and extraordinary artist of all time, to whom the fate has given the daring to know how to impress their actions in the history of humanity, have forged the expression of their masterpieces through the creation of an innovative, impetuous, and apparent contrast that, although the observer appears unreasonable, it ravishes and involves the spirit in a mysterious path, intrinsic to the most profound and shocking historical, philosophical, and religious involvement of all times. The ability to communicate through the image by means of a language so elected as well as harnessed to the passing of time is destined to recall the fundamental steps of the growth of every civilization by conquering the privilege to imprinting an indelible trace of human history. Art and technology represents the indispensable binomial combination of the modern era and oriented towards the recovery of the lost truth. It expresses through the ability to assimilate the notes of an old symphony, which restores its authentic harmony only when forms and colors combine in the context of the elements that compose the material of the work of art, in an hermeneutic order, where every uneven agreement highlights its dissonance and incoherence, assuming the sound of a dissonant note compared to the musicality that dominates the perfection of the absolute truth. I would like to dedicate my speech and relative study to the memory of Grand Commander of the Guardia di Finanza, Senator Luigi Ramponi, who honored me to preside the Scientific Committee for the safety of this Marticon project to struggle against crime and the recycle of illicit capital and evasion. Its affection will remain impressed in my heart as the most precious artwork of which life has given me as a gift. Thank you very much for your attention.
I am very sensitive to what I say now, Sarah, because I know only probably one time or two times Commandant Ramponi. He was here in Eva 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I don't remember. He was here 2-3 times. And I was not knowing except through Sarah, but he appeared really to be a unique man. And so I'm near you and the family to give my best condolences. Unfortunately, in these days, I had one colleague died, a younger colleague died. So life is so that people, we have Jim, for instance, a super good friend, James Emsley, is blocked in London in complex empty situation. Anyway, we must go on. I am optimistic, and I thank you very much. Someone is also a member of Ramponi, but you are chairman, so ask a question.
At the end of the presentation, I present myself.
Yes.
No, I have got the information.
No, but he's a colleague of
yes,
so they are together. So, but it's good that he says some word.
I am Fabrizio Lopini, and I have an experience of 25 years in ADM. Then when I leave the company, obviously I am an expert in ICT technology. I joined SAR in this adventure, and I'm taking in charge the business operation of our company to put on the market, to bring on the market this product and this idea of smart economy. So if you have some question about the project, business plan, business model, I'm at your disposal.
I can answer that apart from about you speaking, that SAR is really very expert in restoration, and not only restoration but in all the art. And your professor in Florence and all the ladies, you know very well, appreciate her very much. So she represents how in Italy we had yesterday in Montira one young artist, Imposimato, which is the name of the president Imposimato di Roma, Imposimato by name, you know, is a very important person. And he presented the modern art, which has a Renaissance connection, in the color, and they also presented, because for living, anyone needs money, So she works for the big film Radar to do some cover of big shows or dressing, beautiful. So what I like to say is that the individual or few people together, when they have a good ideas, they can go as in Germany, also in Italy. And it's not the way. I need to do synergy, but we need the creativity, we need the new ideas to compete with international.
I have just a question, not with regard to your approach or to the method, but just a fact. I've been astonished when you told us that in 1506 the Holy Shroud has been exhibited in Torino.
Yes, yes.
And is there any trace that maybe Dürer had a chance to see it or
To be in touch with this kind of...
I think it's a long,
yes,
it's a long time that the shroud is in Turin, so this is possible. It's possible, but because many people visit, I visited also one time, and it's impressive from many points of view. No one has really understood how this happened in a very, very truth way. But it's possible that some
It's possible, yes.
had the inspiration visiting the scene.
So if there aren't any more questions,
We have a coffee break.